Hello everyone, I'm Elisa Lanari. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity. We're here today to talk with Professor Steven Vertovec, our director, about his book Superdiversität, published by Suhrkamp. The book is the German translation of Superdiversity, which was published earlier this year. Steve, can you talk us through your academic journey, how it began, and how it arrived at this book?
Right, well, throughout my career, I've always been involved in research that has something to do with social difference and different configurations, different kinds of societies marked by social difference. This started when I was a student, an undergraduate and master's student, where I specialized in Native American traditions and religions and how they came in contact with Western Christianity and so forth. So went through to doctoral research in colonial and post-colonial contexts in the Caribbean, where societies were very diverse through slavery, through indentured labor and so forth. Going on to research on Hindus and Muslims in the UK and in Germany under migration circumstances, through to a whole phase when concepts of transnationalism, diasporas, cosmopolitanism were coming into vogue, and did a lot of work on that. And these bring different dimensions or perspectives on diversity, what we now call diversity. And all of these sort of led up, and I don't know if culminated is the right word, but led me to thinking about social complexity and what we now call superdiversity.
The book is about superdiversity, migration, and social complexity. You coined the term superdiversity and first wrote about it in 2007. Since then, the concept has been widely taken up across disciplines and has been cited about 10,000 times. Can you tell us how and why you coined the concept, and what did you actually intend to mean with it?
Thanks, yeah. Well, I came up with it for two reasons, really, at the same time. One is that it was at a time when I was living and working in the UK and working with migration statistics and the Home Office, and looking at migration patterns over the previous 20 years or so. And really started to notice that there had been a sea change in migration to the UK during that period, that we've seen a diversification of the migration population, many more people coming from many more places. So that was the first thing, but then also noticing that it wasn't just about more countries of origin, but people were coming under many more migration channels, such as high-skilled workers, students, family reunification, refugees, and so forth, and in very different mixtures. But that also different groups and different combinations were also marked by gender, age, skill, education levels, and we're seeing a real complexification of migration streams to the UK. And I really thought that we needed a new perspective, a new language to talk about this kind of complexity. So the superdiversity thing I coined as a way of talking about not kind of great, fantastic, powerful diversity, but a pattern of diversity that supersedes what was already there in terms of diverse populations. So that was one reason for coming up with it, as a descriptive term to signal something new happening. The other reason I wanted to enter a new language or a new concept into the toolkit was as a kind of critique of multiculturalism. I had already been writing critiques of multiculturalism for some time before the superdiversity thing, because I've been critical as an anthropologist of any sort of language or views on ethnic groups, ethnic communities, ethnic populations that saw them as rigidly bounded, internally homogeneous, kind of ahistorical, timeless entities. And I just simply, as an anthropologist, said this is not how things work. Groups and categories, identities are much more porous and open-ended and internally complex than that. And so again, I was looking for a new language and approach to talk about diversity in society, to try to move away from these rather staid notions that sometimes multiculturalism were giving, state understandings. And so the superdiversity thing, and I think that's why a lot of people have taken up the term as an alternative way to talk about kinds of diversity and social complexity that have been emerging over the past 20 years or so.
Yeah. In your book, you address social complexity through the making, remaking, and transformation of categories and their relation to inequality. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, sure. Well, diversification is one of the key themes that runs through the book. And diversification takes many forms. So one, as I already mentioned, is the fact that through migration, many more people are coming to countries around the world from many more places. And so we have an expansion of the number of ethnic, linguistic, religious backgrounds of people. And this is reflected in, for instance, census agencies trying to keep up with the population. So in Canada in 2021, for the census, we had an expansion from about 250 ethnic categories that one could tick to 540, just reflecting the need to get a view onto diversification of society in that sort of way. But again, the notion of superdiversity is to refer to this diversification and the superseding of previous configurations of diversity that were in a particular country. So not just the expansion of the number of groups, that's a kind of superdiversity light view that a lot of people understand by the term, but also a multidimensionality, many categories coming together to create new social configurations. So again, when I did that original superdiversity work with the British data, we looked at something like the Filipino community in the UK. And with a traditional multicultural view, you would get the sense of a bounded group and everybody being relatively the same. But what we found is that the Filipino community in the UK was actually 70% women. Not only 70% women, but women mainly in their 20s and mainly working with a particular work visa to work in the National Health Service. So this configuration of categories coming together socially position these people in a particular place in society. And we wouldn't get that through previous ideas of ethnicity and migration and so forth. Likewise, we looked at the Algerian community. That was 70% men. And not only 70% men, but men mainly in their 40s and 50s with refugee status who are not allowed to enter the labor market. So again, combinations of categories really socially position people differently. So that's another sense of diversification. But then we also see over recent years much more mixing of categories as well. And what I mean by that, for instance, most obviously is something like the most recent United States Census, where the number of people claiming mixed background, mixed ethnic or racial background, the number of those people tripled over the last 10 years. So something is going on there. Something is happening to the notion of social categorization, how people are claiming different identities, how people are seen differently by way of the multiplication and mixing and making of categories. And finally, another kind of transformation we're seeing it lies in that word transformation, trans, the pronoun. So we're seeing much more discussion these days of transgender, transsexuality, translinguistic phenomena, transnational phenomena. Those basic categories that we had are being transformed by pushing the boundaries, by remixing, by rethinking social categories. And that's all leading to much more complex social patterns, and that's really what the book is addressing.
Thank you. This book was translated to German and published in Germany. Why? How does the concept relate to the German context, and how is it being taken up here?
Well, I'm really pleased to have the book published in German here, because indeed German scholars across many different disciplines, from anthropology, sociology to linguistics, have taken up the term and found use in it, so I'm very pleased at that. But also the phenomenon that I'm talking about, the emergence of diversification and social complexity is as relevant here as much as anywhere in the world. I mean, for instance, some years ago, 10 years or so ago, I worked as a consultant to the city of Frankfurt to help with their integration concept. And so we did a kind of superdiversity lens or analysis of the city of Frankfurt. And it also found that people were coming from over 140 different countries with very different legal statuses, very different social characteristics, employment characteristics, and so forth, educational backgrounds, and were differentially placed throughout the city. And we did an analysis of this, and it showed that Frankfurt was certainly as super diverse as a London or a Toronto or something like that. And again, if we look across Germany, like in other places, we see that superdiversity, the emergence of new forms of diversification and complexity, aren't just in the big cities as well. They're in all kinds of settings, smaller towns and cities and so forth as well. And much research at our Max Planck Institute has looked into these kinds of settings as well. So I think the term and the concepts described in the book are wholly appropriate to contemporary German society, mixing and matching and changing social categories and so forth. Yeah.
Superdiversity has generated interest far beyond academic settings and has been used in policy circles as well, from city councils to health providers to education policy. But how are policymakers actually using and understanding this term, and what do you make of that?
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm both surprised and pleased, of course, that the concept has gone into non-academic and policy-related spheres. Although I am a little bit frustrated by it as well, because as I've looked at policy documents and talked with policymakers, everything from local city levels up to the European Commission level, it seems that many who have adopted the term have adopted what some have called the superdiversity light approach, and that is simply looking at the expansion and diversification of ethnic groups through new waves of migration. And that's a good thing and an important thing to recognize, of course. And many agencies have adopted their policies, to bring on an expanded kind of repertoire of services and language backgrounds and so forth. So that's a good thing, even though it's not the full meaning of superdiversity, which is all about multidimensionality, of coming together of multiple categories and how that affects social position and so forth. So for instance, you mentioned the education field. It's often looked at, let's say, if a population of a particular migration background or religion has low educational attainment, according to the statistics, a usual ethnic-only approach will think that it has something to do with the migration background or ethnicity or religion of a group as to why those attainments are poor. And a more superdiversity approach would look at, no, it's not about ethnicity or religion, it's about the confluence of migration statuses, migration histories, positionalities, to where people are in the city and in social hierarchies, about skill sets of parents, about a number of factors coming together. And it's that sort of complexity which I think policymakers need to adapt and actually join up policymaking across departments much more, and not simply write everything off as, oh, this is a question of ethnicity or religion, to try to explain things. No.
Thank you. The book provides a very timely and contemporary look at diversifying societies. But where do you see this going in the future?
Well, I certainly think that patterns of diversification are going to continue and become even more complex as we move into the future, especially given large trends like demographic aging and climate change. We're going to see more people on the move from more places to more places under different sorts of conditions and categories. So that will certainly continue into the future. I get into notions of complexity in the book, and one of the key notions in complexity theory is emergence. So I think we are in a period of emergence right now. New social formations are taking place as these categories mix and are remade. So those will continue. Exactly where they're going to go, we don't know. Also part of complexity theory is we can't see exact linear trajectories of where some of these things happen. But one of the things that concerns me most, that I do get into in the book as well, is as we've seen patterns of diversification expand and accelerate over the last couple of decades, we've seen many different kinds of responses to diversification. Many of them driving thinking and responses and political mobilization of the far right. There are many people who are very threatened by and concerned about and fear patterns of diversification. In other places, we see new patterns of cosmopolitanism, of new modes of living together emerging. And exactly what triggers one kind of response to another response is something that social science really needs to get a grip with, and I raise some of those kinds of issues in the book as well.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Steve. I found the book really fascinating.
No, pleasure. Thank you.